Hi guys, welcome to our daily encounter. Yesterday we saw that Judah separated himself from his brothers and also joined himself to the people of the land. And we looked at how that created a lot of problems in his life. Well, today in our reading in chapter 39, we see Joseph come into contact with a similar situation and maybe even similar temptations, but having a totally different outcome. We noted yesterday that Judah departed from his brothers voluntarily, but Joseph is separated from his brothers in chapter 39 involuntarily. Remember, his brothers had sold him to the Ishmaelites, and the Ishmaelites took him down to Potiphar's house, and that's where he's at. Through no choice of his own, he finds himself in Egypt, separated from his family, separated from his heritage, and basically just living there among foreigners from his perspective. Now, in chapter 39, we see that Joseph actually succeeds where Judah failed. Judah fell for the temptation of sexual desire for a harlot. And he falls for that, and again, it causes some problems and some shame in his life. But Joseph also encounters this. If you remember, Potiphar's wife was coming to him. We're told that he was handsome in appearance and in form, and Potiphar's wife looked on him with desire, and she really wanted to be with him. And day after day, she persisted. Well, one day it got to the point where it came to be that they were in the house by themselves. All the servants were out. It was just Joseph and Potiphar's wife there. And she made a pass to him, and she wanted to lay with him. And she grabbed his coat, and he fled out of there with the coat still in her hand. And she used that coat to say that Joseph actually tried to take advantage of her. And when she screamed, he left the coat. And he ends up in prison, in Pharaoh's prison because of it. But he makes a very important statement while he is doing this. And he says here in chapter 39, he says, but he refused, this is verse 8, he refused and said to his master's wife, behold, with me here, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house, and he has put all that he owns in my charge. There is no one greater in this house than I, and he has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do this great evil and sin against God? So, a lot of integrity by Joseph. Joseph really doing the right thing, in contrast to his brother Judah, really stands out as a man of integrity. But as we look at the chapter, there's a lot of things that were in play for Joseph that helped him to succeed, even though he was separated from the people of God, from his family, and things that we can emulate, because there have been a lot of us who perhaps have not been able to be with the people of God because of the pandemic. In 2020, people were staying home instead of meeting in churches. We've been doing live stream, that sort of thing, and people haven't had that one-on-one contact with people of faith. And they find themselves in a situation similar to Joseph. They're not voluntarily separating themselves from God's people. It's just an involuntary thing. It's because of the circumstances. Well, some of the things that Joseph did, they can do too, and we can all do, to help make sure that we don't fall into the trap of Judah. So what did he do? Well, for one, he stayed busy. While he was there at Potiphar's house, he worked hard and he was diligent, so much so that he moved up the ranks and actually became over all of Potiphar's house. And that's something that can help us too. If we're being disconnected from the people of God, we're not able perhaps to go to church like we used to, we still need to stay busy. Still need to be engaged in the spiritual disciplines. We still need to be bearing fruit for the Lord in whatever capacity we're able to do that. And still keep ourselves focused on being kingdom-minded, to seek first the kingdom. seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. So staying busy is one way to do it. When we become idle, when we just kind of shut off our spiritual, the spiritual switch in our hearts, and we just say, well, I can't go to church, so I'll just kind of coast until I'm able to again. Then we can begin to drift in the wrong direction. Another thing Joseph did was he seemed to keep this separation between himself and the people around him. That's the way it comes out in the text anyways. You don't really see Joseph buddying up with the Egyptians. You don't really see him. He doesn't even really take for himself wives at this point from the Egyptians. He kind of seems to be just minding his business, doing what he needs to do, succeeding, becoming successful, but not really being influenced by the people around him. So that's something else that can be helpful whenever we find ourselves beyond our control, having to be separated from the people of God. It's very important for us to be very careful, maybe especially careful about the influences that we have around us. Not having that positive influence, that positive encouragement every week, we might be more susceptible to fall into traps when we get into negative influences that we might find ourselves in. So that was another thing he did. And then a third thing that he did was he kept himself, well, most likely, it doesn't say this in the text, but in all likelihood, he probably remembered the bad consequences that came from his brother Reuben. In chapter 35, you just have a really short section where it talks about the fact that Reuben went in and laid with one of Jacob's concubines, Bilhah. And because of it, it caused a lot of problems between him and Jacob. As a matter of fact, when you get into chapter 49, this is what Jacob says about Reuben. In verse 4, he says, "Uncontrolled as water, you shall not have preeminence, because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it. He went up to my couch." So Jacob's still kind of holding a grudge there, even towards the end of his life when he's blessing his 12 sons. And maybe Joseph took that to heart. Maybe he realized what a break in the relationship between Reuben and Jacob that took place because of this sexual sin that Reuben engaged in. And maybe Joseph took that to heart and said, hey, if I do that with Potiphar's wife, it's going to mess up my relationship with Potiphar. We just don't know, but perhaps that helped him. And that can help us as well. When we look at what sin does to other people and we see the destructiveness of sin, when we find ourselves not being able to be around the people of God, we can take that to heart and realize, you know what? Other people may not be able to, I may not have the accountability I had before from the church or from other people that I'm used to being into contact with, but I can still walk wisely and realize that sin is just as destructive whether I'm around the people of God or not, and take that to heart and use that as a means by which to abstain from sin that might come from various temptations we encounter. But then the last one is the one that I think stands out the most and is probably the most obvious, and that is that he said that he could not commit this sin against God. We read about this. He said, "How then can I do this great evil and sin against God?" And this was the biggest one. That is that he still found himself accountable to God. Even though his dad wasn't around, even though his brothers weren't around, even though the people that had this great spiritual heritage wasn't around, God was around. And so he still felt accountable to God. And that is probably what will help us the most when we find ourselves separated from the people of God. That is, just to stay accountable to God, to recognize the fact that maybe nobody else can see what we're doing. Maybe we feel like we can get away with a little sin here, a little sin there. God still sees it. And all sin really directly affects our relationship with God. And when we sin, yes, sometimes we can sin against another person, but ultimately we're sinning against the Lord. And so that helped him stay grounded and kept him out of trouble there at Potiphar's house. At least, he still got into trouble, but at least he wasn't the one at fault. And he could at least take comfort in the fact that he was innocent throughout the whole situation. So let's take the example of Joseph. Let's not follow the example of Judah as we talked about yesterday, and let's follow the example of Joseph. We find ourselves separated from the people of God, maybe because of the pandemic, or maybe because of other health issues, or other circumstances, and we just can't really meet with people like we used to. Let's still stay busy. Let's still stay busy and do the work of the Lord. Let's also keep ourselves separated from the world. Let's take to heart the consequences of sin that we see in other people's lives and how destructive it is. But foremost and above all, let's remember that even though other people may not be around, we are still accountable to God, who sees all and knows all. I think if we can follow this example, we can still maintain our integrity, even though we might be separated from God's people. So that, guys, I do thank you for watching the video today. I hope you guys have a great day. Love you guys. God bless.